And how's your small and community work linking in with this? Do you recognise what's being
Yeah, so
talked about?
yeah, we in terms of talking about people wanting to participate and be involved in consultation and the amount of people that want to have their voice heard, we can definitely, from our perspective, that's definitely taking place. We run a small practice in Manchester which is using design as a catalyst really to have conversations with the community. That's what we do. We run projects that build things in public realm developments. Most notably in Manchester, it's the Pilcrow pub. So over 12 months we had about 600 volunteers come along and help build this pub. And the aim of that project really was to create a sense of belonging and a sense of ownership over something, and to create a little cluster of people. I guess amplify the number of times you'll bump into somebody that you recognise in the street because you're all part of the same little community. I guess from our perspective, running that project, it felt like a really nice idea at the time to run a project which was designed to involve members of the public and create that a sense of a connected community. But what we're moving into now, our challenges in this area are, we found that it was kind of prescriptive. We told people who were building a pub and we invited them to help us, but we were sort of...
You initiated?
Yeah, we initiated it, and we laid out the framework of how we were going to achieve it, and it wasn't truly live, I don't suppose. It wasn't able to adapt to the pace of change that happened even over that small period of 12 months. So what we're doing now is we've got a studio space on Noma, developed by the Victoria train station, which is acting just as a platform. We're sort of just facilitating any project that people bring to us, which has its challenges because we've removed all of the framework and all of the prescripted idea of how we're going to go about things, and we've given Manchester really the very loose brief of come to us with ideas that will help to make Manchester a more interesting place to be, and we'll help to facilitate it through making things. So that's currently what we're up to, but there's big challenges there about allowing people so much freedom that
This is absolutely bottom up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Community input in whatever their structure is or public realm.
Yes.
It's very interesting. How do you feel about that, Sean?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
I could hear it from here.
I just think that we're very keen on the participation as professionals, and we train to really try to bring people in. I just wonder how much the community and this good example where the community gets involved, how much they want to get involved, or the plan sometimes is that we use the wrong language. I mean, like placemaking probably doesn't mean anything to anyone. There may be a healthy streets is more, it's a word that you attach more meaning because it's health or security, and sometimes we struggle getting the community involved. I mean, we get groups, we have a fabulous disability design reference group, probably best in the country, I would think, very engaged people that have added value to the way we design transport. But they're very motivated. I get very motivated in my street because someone built an extension with the wrong brick, and that hit me. I thought, why?
Innovation.
Yeah, but and suddenly there's things that trigger the desire to participate, and sometimes I just don't think we're triggering that sentiment to people so that they really come with emotion, and if you don't do that, then you end up delivering and imposing the projects. We'll get HS2 here, big project. How do we involve the community in such a mega project that is going to transform the whole of the city? There'll be pressure groups that will involve, but the community. I mean, on the other side, we bring a bit of technology through IoT, through Internet of Things, virtual reality where we're getting people to walk through a station, or we're getting people to cycle down a road, and that helps in the design, and it's very, it's a physical participation in a way. So I think, what to say is probably we're not challenging the community now to really get them into the participation.
Can I come in on that as well? A couple of years ago I was asked to do a presentation from the Chamber of Commerce and Great Manchester Chamber of Commerce to a number of sort of heads of planning from around the dispersed city region. One of the conversations we got into is objections against aesthetics or massing and things like that, but really a lot of objections are to things like, will this make my commute longer? Will I be able to park my car? So these are invisible infrastructures, and I think, you know, maybe the innovative bit of this is actually how you make the invisible visible, how you start to develop evidence-based decision making, how you put forward arguments not based on, look at this beautiful drawing, look at this beautiful piece of architecture, look at this infrastructure that works on an engineering way, but one that actually talks about things on a time basis. I think it's very important also to understand the infrastructure of a city as something which is a number of overlapping infrastructures which change over time. So to have something which is successful now and pull everything together, as soon as you've got it, it won't be. They're wicked problems. So I think maybe this is the bridge over, and you touched on it then, to the other side, is how you use emerging things such as IoT and things like that to actually start to inform policy making and to start to have evidence-based decision making that goes beyond the finger in the air, this is how maybe it should be, or this is my vision. What are the visions of the city? Is the trajectory that we're going on at the moment going to end up with that vision? Is the vision incorrect? Do we need to shift path? Or is the vision that's going to happen or could happen that isn't the one that's there, is that necessarily incorrect? So I think, you know, I think it'd be quite interesting maybe to start to bridge over to what are the tools that are there at the moment that are emerging, what are the data sets that are emerging, and not just to make them visible, but what you actually do with it to inform what you do and how you act in the city, maybe.
I think, yeah, absolutely, in terms of the way you actually communicate with people and the questions that you ask, and actually taking that time to understand what it is that's important to people and what people actually need.
Stefan, I can hear you.
Yeah, well,
You're wriggling a bit.
I think I was starting to wriggle. There are a few things coming up in terms of, you know, the kind of city that we're describing, and we're describing quite a nice city sitting here. But actually, the evidence is that the city is really unpleasant for most of its population. We have got really terrible health outcomes, and people don't get access to the things that they need access to, and doesn't do well in any kind of deprivation stat at all. And so when we're talking about consultation or asking people to get involved with things, there's a whole set of barriers to involvement, or the capability of being involved, that we have to address. And most of the standard kind of processes of procurement of building and infrastructure do not in any way address the difficulties of people overcoming engagement. You mentioned, you know, making the city a better place to grow older, and this fits in, you know, as a segue to some of our work in terms of age-friendly cities, because the title of the strategy is making Manchester a great place to grow older. And this started on the basis of the realisation that all slightly wealthier retirees were vacating the city about 15, 20 years ago. And it's slowed a little, and the city has gradually changed. The city centre's demographic has improved, you know, kind of mixed a little. But the kind of ring around, you know, the ring road, all the areas around the ring road, deprivation hasn't changed. The health stats have got slightly worse. The next cohort of older people is actually showing signs of kind of going to have worse health than the current cohort. So it's getting better. It's not getting better, despite a lot of the things that have been going on. so that's just an observation. I think we've got to be aware of that when we're talking about different communities of who we're actually talking about. And that's just older people, but it's also true with younger people as well.
There's a big danger of people just focusing on the city centre rather than...
Well, yeah, I mean, in the city centre there are actually very few older people that live in the city centre. So if you're looking at that, there are 5 little clusters within the city centre of Manchester, and it's very young. So it has a very different demographic to most cities across the UK. So there are a couple of things there about, kind of, I think if we're, looking at maybe the essence of what the city is, obviously there's a kind of cultural and aesthetic theme there, but actually we would be coming from an evidentiary point of view, which we share with Rob and some of Rob's work. We'd be much more interested in trying to work out what the experience of people is, especially when you start then talking about access to infrastructure. Talking to Raphael just before we started, if you're in Miles Platting, if you look at the spatial framework, you look at Miles Platting, there is a grid of buses. It looks fine. If you live in Miles Platting, there is one bus that you can get on and it goes to Huddersfield. And so when we've been talking to people in Miles Platting, actually many of the older people that don't have access to things, they've got a bus pass, they go on a day trip to Huddersfield on the bus because it's an hour and a half in the warm, and then when they get to Huddersfield, they're in the city centre and they're right near a few cafes and things like that. I'm not, that's not an anecdote to say how poor the experience of people is, but just how particular it is. So when we're talking about kind of understanding place, actually, when we started our project, which is supposed to be an asset-based approach and talking to people, we realised there were 11 other projects asset mapping across the city, and not a single one of them was connecting or had a central methodology. So when we're talking about this massive will that was amongst the profession to really find out what's going on in a place and try and do the right thing and engage, it just occurred to me that maybe one of the ideas we could float is how we kind of bring together that expertise. So just one final example from our project, we've been gathering a wide range mixed methods approach to the evidence of a place. So it includes health intelligence, urban design analysis, surveys and things like that about people's well-being. And one of the outcomes from a resident-led board, so they're completely involved, one of the outcomes for a discussion with them was a mapping of their transport infrastructure in Human Moss Side. And we uncovered a few things, like there's a bus that only operates in term time because it's partly funded by the university. But when that bus isn't running, the people in the poorest part of the ward with the worst outcomes can't get to the MRI without taking 3 buses. So it's got a massive knock-on, but no one would have ever known that without that, kind of very intricate level of analysis. But because the Hume Council is part of the board, that's now been taken to Transport for Greater Manchester and the University, and they're petitioning to change that. So that's a really direct involvement of the poorest in the community in infrastructure decisions. And it, in the past, I would imagine that you might have a planning system that would have kind of maybe tried to do some of those things. So my question is really, are we trying to replace the planning system with this kind of discussion?
No, that's another question altogether.
So I had that brewing for a little while, and
then I can see it was brewing. And actually, I think what you said is very relevant, and you're the first person that said that you have an idea of something we ought to be doing, which is actually to getting our evidence and expertise together, and presumably coming up with some sort of matrix so we understand what's being done, let alone how we use that evidence going forward. But I'm hearing lots of different conversations about different Manchesters here.
Well, there's a thing around what we mean by connectivity, isn't there? A kind of meta level, you can say, well, it's all about digital flows, it's about people flows and so on. But on the ground level, it's about how you engage with assets. I mean, some of the work we do with Stefan is how you actually connect up big meta level data analysis to on the ground action. And then I think also the kind of the difference between physical and invisible infrastructures, physical and invisible networks. You need physical networks. We live in a thing. We're surrounded by stuff you can touch and occupy. But the way that behaves is obviously informed by invisible stuff.
There's a lot. I've been taking notes of the conversation. There's a lot coming out about sort of intangible distinctions and invisible elements of community and culture, which, whether we like it or not, probably are informing everybody else and everything else. I think this is beginning to head into the second part of this conversation, I suspect.